So Briahna Joy Gray got into a debate, or was in a debate with Sam Seder on the notion of forced to vote. Now, this debate was maddening to watch in some respects. There were times where both sides were saying things that I thought were a little strange. But all things being equal, there was a point that Briahna made that I think is a key point that shouldn't be understated. I would even go so far as to say can't be understated or can't be overstated. And honestly, out of all of this, I think it's the most definitive point that needs to be made. Because this point gets back to something that took place that I thought was a travesty, was an outright missed opportunity in 2020. And on some level, this is what she's hitting on. This idea that for populist candidates, your power, your strength is not in the political space with a bunch of people that basically want to snuff you out. Your power, your strength, it's in the name, it's in the population. The 20 to 30 million people that believe in you, that push for you, that send you cash, that show up at your events. Those are the people who are basically your supporters. Joe Biden couldn't fill an outhouse, and Sanders was able to pull all of these people in and win argument after argument after argument. If you remember, healthcare, environment, what was the one thing that Joe Biden won? The fickle mistress of electability. That was the thing that he was running on, and that's the thing that Sanders didn't challenge on. But Sanders flaming out isn't what I'm talking about. Even the day that Sanders conceded, the conceding in and of itself is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the conceding and in that moment abandoning Medicare for all. This argument that the crowd, the popular or the populace, relies and needs the crowd for their ability to act in the political space. She is entirely right on that. And like I said, 2020 is a remarkable example of that very basic point. We dropped the ball on the left in getting Medicare for all over the finish line in 2020. 88% Democratic support. How does a policy that has nearly unanimous Democratic support still not get over the finish line, where you have a Pelosi who hobbles it in the House, who have a Senate who doesn't even necessarily bring it up or talk about it, and you have a president who basically said he will veto it? What of this is indicative of representative government? We've inverted our politics. Instead of having a situation where politicians represent the interests of the public and they go out and they understand and they figure out a need where the public is demanding action, instead, we've inverted that to a system where left or people on the left and blacks basically throw their support to the candidate unconditionally, hoping, praying for pennies and cheese. That's basically our politics. This idea that it is the responsibility of the politician to get your vote has gone out the window. And I have no idea at what point that happened. I suspect if you accept the argument that you have nowhere else to go and you do it for 20, 30 years, that at a certain point, the system gets ensconced in this idea that you owned to the Democratic Party. The argument that you have nowhere else to go has been something that has been able to cow blacks and lefties with this notion of voting for Democrat regardless of what they do, regardless of how they string you along. 88% support, and you can't get these guys to back a policy. What is wrong with that picture? And should Biden get your support unconditionally if he's not willing to do it? Which is the crux of the point that I'm trying to make here. The idea that we failed on that note, that there wasn't enough political pressure or political push, or that we didn't have enough political oomph to get that over. I don't accept that. I think we did. And I think the difference between getting it across the finish line versus not laid in the crowd, and whether or not that crowd understood that they needed to make a demand with a consequence on the edge of that demand that was sufficient to get the political instrument to pay attention. And yeah, I do think Sanders' concession should have been the moment where Medicare for all became the fighting point. I'm going to show you Bree's point that she made. And like I said, we've inverted our politics. Instead of this understanding that politics or the politicians are supposed to represent our interests and come and get our vote and that type of stuff, it is turned around into people just throwing themselves unconditionally at politicians because they're terrified of the guy on the other side of the of the dispatch. That needs to change. Understand for the moment, when Democrats make the argument that you're going to get Trump elected, the argument is backwards. It's not that I'm going to get Trump elected. 88% of the people in this party back this policy. 74% of the people outside the Democratic Party back this policy. How are you not backing it? And this Trump or whatever other Republican, how are you not backing a policy with that much support? Is that indicative of representative government? And from the standpoint of people, why wouldn't you expect them to do that? It's not you that are basically tanking it for whatever particular Democrat. That Democrat doesn't own your vote at all. At the end of the day, the question is whether or not the Democratic Party is not willing to appropriate a policy with that much support and tank it to whichever person they're running against. The left has basically even appropriated the weird influx or inversion of that argument. It is their job to get your vote. It is not your job to unconditionally give it. And until that is understood, we are going to be stuck with this quagmire where people believe this nonsense of you have nowhere else to go. The objective is not to get a Republican elected. The objective is to hold your particular political leader accountable with the idea that, yeah, there are situations where the candidate needs to lose if the candidate is not going to back up the American public. Briahna's right on this particular point. Welcome to the Soapbox.
Will punish X person for this. Pelosi will punish. Pelosi will punish. And it's like, if we're talking part of the power, all of the power that the squad has is that they're enormously popular, not just with the left, but with all of like kind of the yes queen liberals who like a beautiful, stylish, brown woman on the cover of their magazine, whether it's Ilhan or AOC or whomever. So there should be, I sometimes I wish in this moment, I think the thing that hurt me the most is that I wish the squad members recognize that their political capital lay with us, not with them, and lay with the broader public even beyond the left. And that's a real kind of power that, like, I dare Nancy Pelosi to come outwardly at AOC. Right now, if she stays in the inside game, the inside game, then Pelosi's always going to win. But if she comes out into the public, that's where AOC has real power, and she's been so reluctant to do that.
If you look at the reporting on that committee, on the slating committee vote, all the reporting has a line somewhere in one of the reports on it that was this vote public, the outcome would probably have been very different. They would.
Yes. The committee seat that AOC didn't get. If the vote was public, AOC would have most likely won that seat, because at the end of the day, people didn't necessarily want to put a knife in her in the public where everybody could see them putting a knife in her. There may have been consequences for it. Now, think about what's being said for the moment. Her point is that the political power of AOC and the squad isn't within the context of the Democratic Party. Many of those guys don't particularly like her. Many are jealous of her. No. Her power is in the millions of people that back her, that watch her videos, that support her in her stances in regards to to her policy, where you have huge numbers of people that would come and see her speak. She's a rock star in the political space. Same thing with Sanders, though, even to a higher degree. Think for the moment what would have happened if Sanders would have capitulated. But instead of entirely capitulating, he turns around and says, as I said, Joe Biden will get my support. But the 30, 40 million people out there who depended and expected this government to do something about health care, well, Joe Biden is probably going to have to work to get their votes. And Medicare for all is probably going to be that issue. Meaning, yes, if you want to concede, fair enough. But you should not concede on Medicare for all when you have 88% support. When you can make the argument that 69% of the public backs it. You have 300,000 people that are dead, 28 million people that have been affected, not to mention the medical bills that these people are going to have to deal with. This number is going to go up to like 600,000, if not more. How do you justify not doing it? Meaning from an ethical standpoint, even from an economic standpoint, it makes sense. It is right for Sanders to basically come out and say, you guys get their support when you back this particular policy. Now, they would have bellyached, they would have bitched, they would have moaned, they would have done all that stuff. But the only way for Sanders to have any political clout in real terms wasn't in a party that basically was willing to collapse in order to stop him. Oh, your strength, your might is by dragging the public into a debate, making a demand against the political space. There's a difference in those things. This inside game of task force and all this other stuff, those task force weren't real. The public option wasn't necessarily real. Whatever modicum of tweak that is made to Obamacare will not get to the root of the issue. I am making the point that the push, the argument, really, at the end of Sanders' campaign should have been Medicare for all. And by the way, what happens with all of the other lefty groups? What happens with the other lefty organizations? A behavior or attack like that gives them permission to basically advocate for Medicare for all. My point is that politics is a lot about leverage. And it is leverage within the context of being able to make somebody lose. And yeah, to make the argument that 88% of the public backs this, 74% of the general public backs this, how do you justify not backing a policy with that much support, not appropriating a policy with that much support, if that means you dominate the political space afterwards? Who is your base in such real terms where you're willing to basically kick the American public away, even for something that is ethically, morally, and economically feasible and rational? Who are you doing this for? Who are you kicking the American public away for on this, considering the American public is on board for it? She's right. The power of the left, especially the populist left, lays within the crowd. And what would have needed to happen was Sanders would have needed to bring that crowd into the debate, to be able to use those numbers where those people can articulate their particular political thing of a demand. If you allow this to go entirely into the Democratic Party, it is going to be dragged, it is going to be choked, there's going to be a bag put over its head, and it's going to be thrown out into the back alley. Movements go to die in the party. I think we missed something that was significant in 2020. And I think we honestly did have a chance, at the very least, have more of a push for it not to flame out in this weird way. And I got to be honest, I even think a lot of the consternation that's taken place on the left, the fights that have been taking place, has a lot to do with this unspent energy. It's like blue balls or something. It's like there was this hot date, the date goes poorly, you go home, and there's still all of this excess energy. It's that. The left won one policy argument after the left, be it Medicare for all, expansion of Social Security, elimination of student debt, not just within the context of the Democratic Party, but in general. And after you win all of those arguments, after your guy gets to the point where you're like, oh my God, this guy has a chance, and then the entirety of the party basically collapses to get rid of him. Elizabeth Warren stays in the race. All of these lefties kept backing Elizabeth Warren. And what did she do? She took super PAC money at the end just to stay in the race, to hit Sanders in the knees, to ensure that he loses various states that he could have potentially won if she wasn't necessarily in the race, and helping Joe Biden across the finish line. You have a lot of people that are pissed off because it feels like winning the policy argument, but losing it because of, let's say, the institutional muscle of the party itself to maintain its neoliberal vision of the world. It's energy. It's people that are pissed off. Not to mention, they look at the context of the world. They can see all of these people being evicted. They can see all of these businesses being shut down. They can see 20-something million people out of healthcare. There was a report that just came out showing the shift into poverty larger than over the past 50 years. Like, they can see this. And they can see this in the context of the plans and the ideas of policy that they put forth to try to ameliorate that stuff. And they also know that the Democratic Party doesn't back those things. And the fact that they fought so hard about those things makes it that much worse. So for Biden to get in office, basically unconditionally, and the lion that's supposed to be on the left basically was complicit and giving all sorts of unconditional support and giving his supporters over basically to Biden, sheepdogging him into the Democratic Party. Yeah, I think people had some feelings about that. They were bothered by that, to put it mildly. And now you have this situation where the Democratic Party is negotiating with itself down because they don't want to get rid of the filibuster, something that they have the power to do, to enact the legislation that they claim to want to enact under a Biden presidency if they get the House and the Senate. The power of the left and the populists is the crowd. If you have 20 and 30 million people backing you because they want a particular policy, take out the parties for the moment. Medicare for all, just take one policy. And make that argument and stand under that banner every bit as much as civil rights or women's rights or workers' rights. That needs to be a tip of the spear. And in making that the tip of the spear, I think we would have been far better off. Even if Sanders loses, at the very least, you end up with a situation where on the docket, on the marquee, is an argument and a fight where the public itself has set a demand for this particular policy in the political space. Appropriates. Would it be perfect? No. Is it possible that I am entirely wrong? Yes. All of this stuff is prognostication. But by the same token, I can look at what did happen and how grotesquely unsatisfying it was that Biden basically unconditionally walks in with the left not putting anything on him. Regardless of what the political situation is, you should hold your political leaders accountable. You should have expectations of those political leaders. And if those political leaders are not willing to live up to the expectations, yes, the potential needs to be there for them to lose. There has to be something in our politics that basically, let's say, is a weapon at the end of the day to use against your political leaders. And yeah, non-support is part of that. By the way, from the standpoint of the way Republicans do this, there's a reason why the Republican base, like Trump or the Republicans, are basically more concerned or scared of their base. Because their base can go to other people. The Democrats have this notion of you have nowhere else to go. It's not true. But despite the fact that that would be their notion, that's the argument that they put forth. And so you have all of these people that believe they're just stuck with whatever the party gives. It's the reason why Joe Biden will look a black person in the face and say, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. And I'm Joe Biden. I have the ability to tell that because I've been fighting for civil rights for 47 years. When I was desegregating the movie theaters that didn't exist. Look, my point here is Bree's right. I don't even see how this is debatable. And I think even Seder comes around and says, yeah, if she would have gotten the votes, there is a certain thing of popular pressure that a person can wield. Yeah. The key point of 2020 was almost the diminishing aspect of that. The moment that Sanders capitulated and the moment that everything was turned into sheepdog for Biden. All of the energy and all of the force that went into trying to get those things over the finish line went up in smoke almost instantly. And the idea of a task force, which was never going to be anything real and legitimate, was just a vehicle to save face while Biden gets in office, was never going to equal up to what could have potentially got accomplished from the standpoint of a dedicated push for Medicare for all. I think we dropped the ball on that. Honestly, the force to vote was kind of a secondary process that also should have been pushed. There was no downside to pushing for force to vote. It's not as if the squad and the lefties are applauded when they walk through. Anyway, the DSCC, the DCCC took actions to blacklist various members. They were even working with groups trying to take down incumbents. They're already going after you. They're already attacking you. What do you think you're going to get by beseeching them and begging them for more? No, the correct response would have been force to vote. The correct response would have been to demand Medicare for all with the idea of millions backing you with that particular demand. Those are the things that should have been done. This was an adversarial politics. And yes, I do believe leverage is the thing that commands politics, not begging. You have a situation where blacks have like 90% backing a candidate, and yet only get theatrics. How many blacks wanted Medicare for all? Think back to South Carolina. South Carolina, Sanders get whooped. He gets crushed. And yet, Medicare for all still wins in regards to health care. Save Kamala Harris. Give people Medicare for all. And I would say for people who are running a populist campaign and is pushing very hard on the left, your strength is your crowd. And if you can get dragged into Democratic Party politics, the energy and the drive of that stuff can be basically sapped out in this kind of bureaucratic nightmare where their objective and goal is to not pass those things that you said that you were in Congress to pass. So yeah, she's right. Like, share, and subscribe. I might see you guys a little bit later this evening.